Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another segment of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have a great guest. We have Alain Goubau. He is CEO of Combyne Ag. Alain, how are you?
I'm very good, Tracy. Good to see you.
Good, good. I am so happy to have you on the show. We are doing a special innovation in agriculture series on Combyne Ag. So before we dive in, can you tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and who is Combyne Ag?
Very good. Yeah. So I'm originally from the Ottawa Valley in Eastern Ontario, where my family runs a mixed dairy and cash crop farm, and that's where I grew up. Prior to leading Combyne, I worked as a chemical engineer. That took me around the world building chemical plants, so very fun job. And then I also worked a bit at a global consulting firm where I specialized in agriculture. Kind of easy because my initials are A and G, so just branded myself the Mr. Ag guy. And today I lead the team at Combyne Ag, where our core product is a software app. We call it Combyne app, and it's a software tool purposely built to manage crop marketing, but as a farmer, from a farmer point of view. So the vision we have at Combyne Ag is we like to say we want to help optimize the value of every bushel of grain that a farmer markets. And the way we do that is we build what we call, or like to call, a crop marketing operating system, something that's purposely built for farmers that combines technology and data to help them optimize grain marketing, revenue, risk, and profitability decisions. So think of Combyne as that crop marketing operating system built for farmers.
Okay, excellent. So, as an entrepreneur myself, I always love to hear about the why behind companies. So, can you tell us a little bit about the why behind Combyne Ag?
Yeah, so as I indicated, I grew up on a mixed dairy and cash crop farm, and I would say, like most farmers, we were pretty okay at grain marketing, but there were kind of a couple observations that always kind of picked away at me watching this. So on our farm, my brother handles the marketing, really kind of making the decisions on how much to sell, when, to whom, and when it comes to tracking all this, I'd say I wouldn't consider him best in class, and he knows this. And then my sister and my dad, they kind of like to know where things are at. My sister on our farm handles a lot of the dairy herd, so she's has a vested interest in making sure that as we balance our crop, we keep some of it to feed the herd, and we don't sell too much, so to speak. And then my father, just as sort of the veteran, likes to know a little bit where things are at. Has some views on how to manage risk when it comes to crop marketing, and so he just likes to know what's going on. And then finally, like any diligent bookkeeper, my mother wants to know where our different contracts are at, what's the forward-looking cash flow that's coming in as a result, and so which means she's chasing my brother for documents. So kind of watch this and you say, okay, like this is standard, or maybe there's things to change here. And then the one thing that you realize is everyone's kind of looking for the same information. They're just using it slightly differently. And then in parallel, so I kind of work outside the farm for a while. And then one of the things I found myself doing was I was working for a software company. At the time, it was Farm Lead. It was trying a different approach. It was trying to build a marketplace to buy and sell grain. And in that, I started kind of noticing a few things. And in software, when you're building software, there's the statement that says you should fall in love with the problem and not with your solution. And while at the previous company, well, we had some modest success in kind of helping broker feed grains and specialty crops. We never really broke out into the larger volume crops like wheat, canola, soybeans, and corn. But we were noticing some patterns. And so a couple of folks on the team, we kind of took a step back. We're like, what are we hearing? And let's kind of tie the different threads of things that we're seeing. And through that, we were like, wait, there seems to be a set of problems. It's very different than what we're working at. so maybe we should really pivot and focus on that. And so one of the patterns we were seeing was really like we see a lot of farmers kind of expressing something that feels like there's a lot of siloed information, right? Information that is either in the category of what I like to call how much crop do you have to sell or expect to sell. So basically either sort of forward-looking acres and yields or as harvested totals. And seems a little bit in different formats in different places, right? It's either scattered in your head, on a report from a combine, on a report from a grain cart, some Excel sheet, some whiteboard. It's there. It's just a little bit in different places, and everyone has their own version of it. And then I would say the situation where you kind of turn to what we call kind of what you've committed or need to deliver or have delivered, kind of the trade document side of marketing crops. So low tickets, settlements, contracts, obviously. Those are also scattered. They're scattered across software, paper, individual phones. People are taking notes. Some people have an Excel sheet. And then you also realize, wait, the format of these things is kind of always the same information, but it's organized and labeled differently. Or in the medium changes, right? Like we said, paper, PDF. Sometimes it's a digital portal. So things have started to get digital. But then when you realize when it's digital, it's typically that information is inside a proprietary app that's kind of customized around the grain buyer, which makes a ton of sense because it's sort of an extension tool of the grain buyer's workflow. And so we were like, okay, that's great, but what's kind of the mirror image version of that for a farmer, right? So grain buyers, there's been some really good, sophisticated tools that help a grain buyer buy grain, understand how much they have, hedge, all these things. What's the mirror image that we asked ourselves for a farmer? And so that's kind of where we said, wait, that's this thing that we should put together a crop marketing operating system built for farmer, because we said the jobs that a farmer needs to do, the jobs to be done, as it's kind of the lingo for a farmer when it comes to marketing grain, is not the same as the job to be done for a grain buyer. So let's focus on that. And so we kind of landed on the name Combyne as a bit of a play on words. We wanted something that farmers would remember. So a combine with a Y, yes, but a combine is a farm machine that's highly associated with grain. But the other thing is the origin story of a combine is really interesting when you think about it, because a combine is a farm machine that originally came together as 3 or 4 different machines that were all doing different things to bring them all together. And so same idea, what we're trying to do is combine, we kind of play around with the word, to one single place all the information that's relevant for making good crop marketing decisions. So that's sort of the long arch story behind the how we came up with Combyne and how it came to be.
Clever. I love it. Thank you for sharing that. As an entrepreneur, I'm always interested to hear those origin stories, the why, and also for our audience of farmers out here watching, they like to know those things too. So let's take maybe one tiny step back. Some of the stuff you've covered a bit, but I'll just take us back and then we'll walk through a few things again. So
Sure.
The end user, pretty straightforward, but do you want to touch on that? And then we'll dive into some software details.
Sure. Yeah. So as you've probably picked up, so our primary user is a farmer, and it's a grain farmer. So someone who is growing and selling grain, whether it's a pure play crop farmer or a mixed farmer, they're growing and they're selling grain at some point. Typically would be growing a few commodities, 2, 3, maybe more, and at least have probably some on-farm storage for part of their crop, not necessarily all of it. Or if they don't have on-farm storage, they're at least doing some amount of forward contracting as a kind of way to get around the lack of on-farm storage. And so size isn't a strict differentiator, but typically we see sort of in the north of 500 if you're, say, more in Eastern Canada and corn soybean world, or more 1,000+ acres if, say, you're more in Western Canada. Now, I would say that's a bit anecdotal because we actually don't ask people for acres. That's not, we only focus on information that we need to support crop marketing decisions. And so how many acres you farm isn't something we necessarily need. Our our core base of users right now is Western Canada, but we started to see uptake in Ontario and the US. And there's just slightly different, but I would say what's common is everyone's trying to get documents organized. Western Canada tends to have more on-farm storage variations. Eastern Canada, where I'm from, it's like a couple bins and they all have corn or soybeans, so it's a little bit less of a complex phenomenon, but you're still trying to keep your documents organized, your sense of where you are in your marketing. So that's kind of our general user base is a farmer who's marketing crops.
Okay, Alain, why don't we talk about the software details? It's an app on the phone, I imagine. What are the features, benefits? What can farmers do with Combyne?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we have this vision. We want to help optimize the value of every bushel that gets marketed by a farmer. But we also have this saying inside the company that says optimization follows the digitization and unification. And our view is can't really manage something if you don't measure it or have a good sense of where it's at. That's sort of first principle. And the second principle is we kind of view the world of sort of apps in the farm world as kind of one big bucket is focused on managing the production of the crop. You know, there's a lot of focus on yield, agronomy, field management, which is great. But we kind of think crop production management is separate from crop marketing management. And they're related, but they are separate. And so it's the latter bucket that we really focus on, call it the revenue risk side of the farm. So a lot of our thinking is about how do we center around that core world. And so to get the app started, we really focused on two core features around the sort of crop marketing management, which is you kind of need to manage, well, how much you expect to have or actually have, like what it is that you're actually marketing. And then you want to manage what is it that you committed, have to deliver, have already delivered, kind of the trade document side. And so that really kind of puts you in sort of right at the intersection of the farm gate, kind of what's inside the farm, which is what you're producing or expecting to have, but it's in the fields, call it acres times yield. And then on the outside of the farm, what you've signed, committed, and is going to eventually go from the farm and be delivered to the buyer. So we always bring it back to those two big areas of focus. And so what it leads to is when you look a little bit more in depth at the features, for inventory, we have the ability to help you understand what your forward crop is going to look like. So just quickly a sense of acres times yield per commodity. But we also have, once you harvest, we help you with a virtual vineyard and sort of represent your actual harvested total. So that's kind of the inventory core feature set. And then the contract side is, right now we focus a lot on fixed price contracts. We started with the simplest version, but that can be a forward contract / new crop or a spot or old crop contract. Right, and when we're actively working on adding things like futures first, basis first, and targets. So really to help manage the contract side. And contract is kind of the full suite. It's the contract, but also load tickets and settlements. So that's kind of the core framework. Now, when it comes to how things work, one of the things that happens a lot I find in ag tech software is you can do a lot of great things, but you got to type a lot of things first. And so one of the things we really tried to think around is how do we get around typing? And this is something we thought long and hard about and kind of took a little while to figure it out. But what we actually do, what a lot of people like about the app is particularly when it comes to the trade documents, we can read, parse, and digitize those. What we mean by that is some of you may have heard this concept of OCR or feature optical character recognition. You may have experienced it if you're kind of ever scanning a receipt or an invoice. And what it does is it actually pulls out the details. So what's the commodity? What's the grade? What's the quantity? The price? The delivery window? All that information, we've built computer capability in the background to pull that information out. We typically can get it within 12 hours, often faster, kind of depends because the software keeps learning how to do this better and better. But that gets rid of typing. And so what it's really nice is you set up your basic inventory and then you upload a couple documents. And what we do is through that process, we're able to automatically reconcile the inventory with contract position and give you percentage grade marketed, your average rated price across different contracts from different buyers, what you have left in storage, what your delivery schedule is going to look like, what your cash flow schedule is going to look like. So that's particularly the sort of, this is what starts happening when you get rid of typing. You can start getting into those insights. And again, our view is you're going to make optimal decisions if you make informed decisions. You're going to make informed decisions if we can get you all your information in one place first and foremost. So that's kind of the foundational base. Then we started adding a couple other features, and we're working on quite a bit more. So for example, if you have inventory left over in Western Canada, we can start showing you what are the best bids around you, so you have a rough sense of what that's worth, right? A lot of farmers will think of grain as it's kind of core source of money or worth on the farm, and it's true. It's one of the primary assets that comes out of production every year, the primary asset. And then the nice thing is we get this information on mobile. That's the other big difference, is as opposed to folks who do this in a folder and an Excel sheet, those aren't purposely built for sort of making decisions on the go. They're good tools, but I think we were like, let's build something that's really focused on how crop marketing really happens. And so one of the examples we often get is farmers might get a recommendation or a newsletter from an advisor, or they might get a call from a grain buyer that suggests a really good bid for them. So what they can do is pull up Combyne, immediately cross-check where they are, how much they have left, how this next sale could affect our average price. And so that's kind of better than digging up Dropbox or Excel or going to a desktop. But the other thing is the information is always up to date, because all you have to do is basically just upload trade documents as they come. If your yield projection or harvested totals change, just update that. And all the calculation and the updated position and a very simple visual gets done for you. So that's kind of where the core functionality of the app. And then what we're working on next is we're increasingly, and I'll talk, maybe I can talk a little bit about more, is we're looking to get rid or minimize the whole, do we need to parse, digitize, scan documents by looking to connecting directly where those documents are coming from. And then the other thing is everyone's telling us we need to start focusing on costs of production to kind of help support what's a profitable sale versus this sale's not going to generate any gross margin type of thing. So those are the areas we're going next with the app.
That's what I was wondering about too, cost of production. Okay, I have a question for you. This may or may not be relevant, but when I'm learning about something new, I always like to go, oh, okay, they're competitors of, or they're totally different than this company.
Right.
Is there anybody else in the market that's similar to what you guys do? Do you want to take that and build on that?
Yeah, sure. So I would say the first thing is we often say we compete with Excel, and I think that's a fair statement. I think people have used Excel because there hasn't been a really good, malleable solution. So we like to say, okay, can we be better than Excel? And that's a high bar. I think Excel is a really good tool. It's pretty flexible. But again, it's got this sort of, how do you make it really purposely built for mobile and customized for grain marketing? And how do you get rid of typing? So I would say getting rid of typing is probably, it's not very sexy, but it makes a difference for a lot of people, right? So that's something that we're focused on. And I think what's been nice for us is to hear folks say, yeah, you kind of are putting the work into thinking about the user experience, how to design the app, make it simple. I know it sounds cliche, but it is something that we pride ourselves in, and we think it's starting to show by doing these unflashy things. I also like to say design is something that the irony of doing good work on design is you don't notice it because it's built intuitively. So I'd say that's the other area. Now, when it comes to sort of direct versions, I look to kind of two high-level solutions in the world, and they focus on slightly different things. In the US, there's a company called Farmers Risk. They focus on sort of really the hedging and futures and options side, which some farmers use, but not all do, right? Everyone still needs to get their sort of physical trade documents organized and kind of get insights from there. That's still your core of where your revenue, your inventory to market, your cash flow, all that is, but they are complementary. And so we take an attitude of thinking about complementary tools. So we'll, they're kind of something that we think about. How do we think about this part of the equation when you're trying to unify all crop marketing information in one place? Another variation is grain marketing advisors, people that focus more on the analysis, the newsletters, the advice part, right? And one of the things that we set as a core principle is we don't want to get into the advice business. We don't want to get into I analyze the market and give you a perspective. We view that as more complementary to us, right? So typically what we found is crop marketing advisors, whether they focus on, I write a newsletter, whether they focus on, I get a little bit more intimate and work with a farmer to work through and give recommendations, or even when I'm more supporting hedging or risk decisions. We're all saying, look, your core business is providing really good advice and being sort of that trusted source of knowledge in whatever format you share that. But what we hear is everyone that's doing that is in a bit of a relationship, sort of farmer trusted advisor, but they're all looking at the same information. They're all asking, how much do you have? How much have you committed? What's your cash flow goals? Where are we at? Type of thing. And we're like, that's what we do. So we kind of see ourselves as the software tool that supports that relationship, that kind of augments that relationship to say, look, you don't want to be typing, you don't want to be organizing information, you want to focus on giving a good advice. And so let us handle the software part or the organized information part, and you can focus on that part. So that's kind of the key thing. And then a couple of things I touched a bit about earlier, right? We're farmer-centric in how we design, how we build. So we always say, okay, if you're getting advice or you're looking at markets, how do we contextualize that to your specific situation? So we kind of do it with my DIY farmers who kind of read a newsletter, pull up the Combyne app, like, oh yeah, I should sell 10 more percent. It's this many bushels. That's how I should do it. Others are working with an independent advisor and thinking about risk management. And it's similar. It's like, but slightly different. So that whole spectrum we support. Now, I'd say kind of other core things in terms of features that we think about. Other first principle is we built the company with this notion that we needed to integrate and unify with either the on-farm app ecosystem that's there, things that are typically focused on crop production management. And then on the trade document side, yes, we are pulling in contracts, low ticket settlements in PDF and paper form and whatnot and digitizing, but we know that that information is coming out of other software. And so why do we need to go from digital to PDF to back to digital? Can we skip that? And so that's a big area that we're working on actively. It's what we call Combyne Connect. For those who are interested in more, they can go to our website, look at our blog, and we talk about what is Combyne Connect. Because our goal is to say, bring all the information in one place and get rid of typing. So those are kind of some of the core ways that we differentiate ourselves. Pricing wise, we'd like to keep it as honest and fair a value exchange. So, and we're very intentional about that. So the app has a freemium version. You can kind of manage one commodity because our philosophy was, you got to experience the whole thing to decide if it's worth it for you. So set up one crop, add a couple documents, and see the sort of early magic happen. And if you're like, oh, that's pretty cool, that works for one crop, I got 2 or 3 other crops, then you consider the paid version. And we also were like, right now we're just helping organize a lot of documents and get the basic information in one place, which are like, that's not worth, it's worth $200 a year. Like that's what we tested. People were like, yeah, that's a fair value for getting my stuff organized. But our whole concept is we think we should be proportionally paid relative to value we provide, right? So the more value, the more we can justify a price, but let's first prove we deliver value. And I think that's something appreciated about our philosophy is you decide if it works for you as opposed to us trying to kind of sell it to you type of thing. So those are a couple of things. And then maybe one last thing that a lot of people ask themselves about is, what about data policy? So we try to write our data policy in English, like very plain, straightforward, simple English. But most importantly, this is sort of first principle we set in the team is we do not aggregate or derive or build products or value based on aggregated data. And so we don't even say, oh, by default, you're opting in to a larger pool of information that anonymously we can do stuff with. We said, no, first principle, we don't even do that approach. We only use the data as sort of, well, it's your data on the farm, but how do we put it together? Like I said, you can't manage what you don't measure well. How do we put it together to then support your own individual decisions? So that's a key part of also sort of our philosophy. So, consistently be farmer-centric in our thinking. That's how we design, that's how we build, that's even how we collaborate with partners. So people who've worked with us, and we tend to try to say, look, we really want to figure out how to collaborate to build a better farmer-centric crop marketing solution. But what you'll always hear us say is we were candid and clear and consistent with the notion that our core persona, the core person we build for, is a farmer. And so there are times where, well, that sounds a little bit not necessarily aligned with what a farmer would want to do or how they'd want things organized. So unfortunately, we're going to have to be pretty open. That won't work if that's what you're trying to do in a collaboration or partnership. So that's another kind of key defining factor of how we work.
Perfect. You are music to my ears and music to a few farmers' ears. I'm sure they're listening. Easy, fair price, and keeping my data secure and to me, right? I think those are things that are all top of mind for farmers nowadays, right? Those are main concerns. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say you nailed it. Absolutely. Did you want to add anything there?
No, nothing in particular. I think those are kind of core good principles to try to build, but they're hard. Like it's not easy to build. You need to be patient. You need to take your time. You need to do your research. We kind of like to try to spend at least a week a month, if not a little bit more, showing things, testing things with farmers directly, kind of really this bottom up building. But it means you got to put in the effort to get on the road. To just actually yesterday, it was extremely cold in Western Canada, and our research team couldn't get their car started. And so that's kind of what we try to put in as an effort.
Oh, lovely. That is winter in Canada,
Yes.
farm show season. So cold you can't start your car to go or come home. Oh, funny.
I think it was a rental outside a hotel, and think of plugging it in, and then that was sort of, yeah, of course, right? Classic mistake, but in the rush of things you forget, and here you go.
Anybody watching this in Canada, most part of US, they're going, yeah, we've been there. So, okay, let's switch gears. If you don't have anything else to add, that was great information. Thank you for walking us through features, benefits, goals, missions, all that kind of stuff. That was great. You guys had a big announcement recently. Congrats on the order. Why don't you share more with myself and the audience?
Okay, yeah, so indeed, we were recently acquired by Bayer Crop Science, in particular the digital farming arm. But it's also a pretty unique sort of setup and transaction versus what you would typically expect in these situations. So I'll kind of maybe give a little bit of context as to like why did this happen, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's kind of unique at how this is set up. So I think most of us will know Bayer Crop Science, and one of the things is they're big believers in the increasing role of digital in how farms are managed. But I was talking a little bit earlier about this notion of crop production management versus crop marketing management. They tend to focus on what happens on the field, right? Like the sell, seeds, crop protection, and a digital solution like Climate Field View. But they kind of were like, if we're going to, we keep hearing this notion that grain marketing needs to also have its kind of good solution. And if we're believers in digital, we need to be thinking about that. But this is not an area that we know very well. And so this is sort of first reason like Combyne popped up on their radar, because they were like, this thinking, this approach is quite interesting, and it's farmer centric. We tend to be on the farm side of sort of the whole ag equation. So could be interesting. I think they're big believers in our mission and our vision, but they also appreciate that if we want to kind of build this the right way, we need a certain level of patient capital to do that. And that's the way you're going to build something that's truly farmer centric, because it also takes time to kind of reach farmers, make them aware of your solution, and they have sort of both the patient capital and a level of visibility that they were like, I think we can help Combyne in terms of where it's trying to go. And then, they have field view. So they know that field view, to keep it kind of a good, interesting, relevant tool, they got to make sure it interacts well with other solutions. And so again, oh, that's a crop production management tool. What about crop marketing management? So it kind of gives us a chance to test some of the ideas and concept across these two platforms, and then kind of expand sort of, well, how do you make field view particularly valuable? But then if you take equivalent tools and you were to make them interact with something that's crop marketing management like Combyne, that would be beneficial to the broader industry. And so I'll talk a little bit about that piece as well. Now, I'd say the last thing is, like every other company in the world, doesn't matter if it's ag, not ag, every company in the world right now is increasingly thinking about sort of supply chains more broadly. And so if you're a company like Bayer Crop Science, you're at the very top end or the early stages of food and ag value chain, right? Like you're literally where it starts, where the food starts. So they're an upstream player and they're trying to get more involved in thinking about what happens when crop gets past the farm gate. And I would even argue once it leaves the field, because once it's past the field, this is kind of past their world. And that's kind of exactly where we sit, right? We really sit right at the farm gate. We kind of look inside the farm gate to look at what crops available, what's growing, what's been harvested, but that's the inventory piece I was talking about. And then we look outside the farm gate for contracts, load tickets, settlements, kind of the trade documents. So we kind of act as a bit of a thought partner and bridge in that world. And so it's a small part of why this happened, but it could be something that evolves over time. And I can talk a little bit more about that. But more importantly, it's because we understand this whole area a little bit. And some of our technology capabilities could support some early kind of projects or concepts that are kind of think about linking field to bin to truck to processor. That is a bit of a digital link that we can help provide. So those are the reasons why. But let's talk a bit about the model. I think the model is particularly unique. So we were acquired and operate under what's called an arm's length model. So we're basically continuing to operate as if we were a fully separate company. And there's a couple reasons for this. And this isn't just because we wanted it or this is how it happened. We really thought about this long. It probably is why it took about 12 months to figure this whole thing out. Because it was very important for me and my team to say we need to kind of stay true to the vision and mission for Combyne. And that's important because if Combyne is supposed to be this neutral tool that interacts with the on-farm app and the off-farm app world, yeah, we need to also collaborate potentially with other platforms, some of which in some areas are going to be competitive with Bayer's world. And that's fine. So the arm's length model allows us to kind of operate a bit around the periphery of Bayer Crop Science. And so we treat them like any other partner, like any other third-party partner. So we'll work collaboratively, but we're also very much, well, it has to make sense for Combyne. If it doesn't make sense for Combyne, there's no point in forcing it. And it's kind of a trade-off between an open model and an open innovation focused model. We'll see, between the thesis and the reality how that pans out. But I think we want to prove it through action that, look, we work with FieldView, but we work with third parties that are FieldView-like. They all should work because that's what maximizes the value of the concept and the potential of Combyne. The other reason is just it's important that when you think of the information we manage how much crop, like that's very representative of important information for a farmer, because it's like how much value of crop is on your farm, what are you signing, cash flows, all this stuff. So you would never want that to be anywhere close to one of your suppliers. So from a data point of view, we want to also keep those two things really separate. And Bayer's done this before because Climate FieldView also operates under those same principles. So this is not a first time thing for them. They thought about this quite a bit. And then the last thing is they really like sort of our bottom-up approach to working alongside farmers to build things. And so that is something that they wanted to absolutely preserve. And so they also wanted the team to kind of keep operating. Don't change your DNA, your culture. So that's kind of the whole part of the arm's length model. And like I said, it was very important personally for me and my team to get that part right. Why it took 12 months, because we really wanted to kind of be able to preserve the vision and mission, but then gain the benefit of, great, we have a stable source of capital who wants to invest. We have access to a farmer audience and a platform where we think there's some interesting things to build, and we can figure it out collaboratively. Like, I like to define FieldView as a bit of a cousin. It's like we're part of the same big family, but we're not part of the same core family. So that's kind of how that arm's length interaction happens between us and Bayer Crop Science.
Excellent. That sounds like a very strategic move on your part and exciting. Congrats again. That's a huge accomplishment. So you touched on this a little bit, probably several times throughout, but I'll give you a spot to chat about long-term vision if you want to add anything there. What do you see?
Yeah, so big picture long-term vision, optimize the value of every bushel. If you unpack that a little bit, you're kind of like, well, there's so many facets to it. There's cash contracts and inventory. That's our core initial focus. But even with cash contracts, there's permutations. There's fixed price, but then there's basis only or futures only, call it hedge to arrive. There's targets, all these things. So we're like, we can keep expanding in that area. We can move from sort of read, parse, digitize, no typing to why don't we directly connect things to kind of get things flowing. Then you say, well, if I'm managing risk, I need to think a little bit about crop insurance, because very often forward contracting is done with an eye to, well, how much of my yield is protected? Or even in the US, you tend to focus on sort of yield times revenue. So there's an interaction there that we're actively thinking about. And then there's also, I talked about it a little bit earlier, hedging, futures, and options that apply to some farmers. So all these things for us are part of that sort of, call it the Swiss knife of how do you optimize the value of every bushel from a revenue and risk point of view. And we're not saying every single one of those features is going to be relevant to everyone. Again, why kind of we think about let's tier a little bit what's relevant to whom. But that's part of that big bucket umbrella. We want to help optimize the value of every bushel. And so that's the long term where we see ourselves building towards. Now, when it comes to sort of, okay, but recent acquisition, is that going to change anything? And actually, I'd say no, it's business as usual, right? We're even more focused on building because we're like, great, now we don't have to worry about the stability of capital and how things are going to build. We focus on building. I was touching base with my team earlier this week, like, hey, what's changed? And they're like, honestly, nothing. We're building. I'm like, okay, great. That's exactly where we want to be. So I'd say the first big thing, though, is this year is going to be a big investment year. So we actually just hired 10 people, mostly software developers. We're about to add another 10 through the year. A lot of focus on user research, how to design the software well, and then some subject matter experts, so around grain marketing risk. So in case there's anyone out there interested in what we do and thinking, oh, this could be an interesting gig, because one of the core goals we have is we want to try to bring a few more farm folks onto the team. So either you have a background in farming like me or some experience in building software around farm risk. In terms of concrete goals, this year, one of our big focuses is something we call Combyne Connect. And Combyne Connect, in software lingo, there's this notion of APIs. APIs, application programmable interfaces, but who cares about the lingo? Think of it as the pipes that connect software between software tools. And so that's a big part of what we're focused on this year. We've been kind of laying the groundwork, the concept. We played around with a few things over the last year and a half, and some of the early users of the app saw our attempts at that. We're not shy about saying if we don't get it right the first time, we're going to iterate it. We're going to scrap it, build it the right way, but we're also learning. So that's going to be a big part that we're going to spend some time on. The visual behind me is kind of conceptually what it represents. If you want to read more, go to our website, combyne.ag, Combyne with the Why blog, and you'll see a bit. We talk about Combyne Connect. And then the other thing is people are like, okay, very cool, simple, record keeping, no typing. I can start seeing it, but you need to go deeper on some of the financial insights, costs of production, give me a sense of revenue, risk, gross margin, all these things. So that's a big area that we're also working on this year. So, and last is, okay, well, I talked a bit about FieldView as a crop production management system, us as a crop marketing management system. So we are exploring what are some interesting ways to think, well, how do you go from, I've got, say, my harvested totals from my combine to how do I start linking that to my crop marketing management decision making? So one of the things that we're really thinking through with FieldView is, okay, but what would be some really good features and ways to create value across the two platforms? What does that look like? But one of the things that I'm steadfast around is we're going to do that with farmers that use both, and they'll help us develop what makes sense for them, as opposed to thinking about it in the office and then being like, oh, we'll build it, it'll be perfect. But we've realized that's not the way to do things. I'd say one last big thing, big picture vision. And not that I claim to be able to tell the future. I think that's a very dangerous thing in software and ag and many things. But when you take this concept of optimize the value of every bushel, right? And you kind of break that down a little bit. You say, well, how do you optimize value? Well, you optimize value around the intrinsic composition of grain, right? Corn, starch goes into ethanol, goes into animal feed as a source of energy. Oil seeds, you split it into oil and a protein meal. The oil is either human consumption or it goes into renewable diesel, for example. The meal is a source of protein, feed livestock with it, right? That's like the basic of what you get paid for. But then in some markets, there's a second layer of value, which I kind of like to think about as sort of the quality or the specific composition. Classic one would be protein levels in wheat. But I would say quality shows up in many other crops, whether implicit or explicit. Sometimes more often than not, you get penalized when it's not the right quality, but there are markets where you get extra value for it. So that's kind of a second optimization layer. But could there maybe in the future, something that same way quality is graded today is something like sustainability potentially going to be graded. Now, I'm very cautious about this because you tend to open up a whole can of worms. We can have a whole other discussion on this if you want. But I think the concept and framework is interesting to think about, which is this a third dimension of optimize the value of every bushel? And I talked a little bit about some supply chain work that Bayer is kind of thinking about and what's our role in it. And I would say I don't think this is entirely unrealistic to think about. Like even in, say, take the Canadian setting, a lot of our export markets, we really pay attention to spray levels and MRLs. So you could call that, yeah, it's quality, but maybe it is a version of sustainability because a consumer and end market cares about it. And Canada's actually done a really good job at capturing some of these markets. Sure, the US also has markets they capture that way. But the point being is, could this be a third dimension that over time farmers get recognized value for? I think that's a TBD, but we would be naive to kind of not at least keep an eye on what's going on there. Again, around this big umbrella of optimize the value of every bushel. So I would leave with this thought: is selling grain selling for its pure processing characteristic, chemical engineering me, or its sort of somewhat at times unique quality, and maybe something that may feel like a sustainability focused carbon intensity residue, who knows? But I think like when you think about the future, you need to be kind of paying attention or thinking about these things. And so that's an area we think about long term, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen or what it's going, or we know what it's going to look like.
Excellent. Wow. There's a lot there, Alain. Exciting too. Good for you. You have your hands full, and I know you have a great team that's growing. So I really appreciate you coming on here, telling us more about Combyne Ag and the recent acquisition, walking us through that too, because we all know in this industry, sometimes that changes directly, but from listening to you, you guys are so farmer centric, and the arm's length model for me, that's interesting, right? Then it keeps it open to the broader industry, right? And
Yeah, I'd say the arm's length is quite unique, and I'm even curious to see how it's going to evolve. I think there's a lot of flexibility. There's even a thinking down the road. Maybe we deepen partnerships with non-Bayer entities. Many options going forward, but at least the foundation I think is really interesting and see where it's going to take us.
fantastic. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. If you have anything else to add before we wrap up, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I'm going to get you to do a call out to where farmers can go learn more, try your product, all that good stuff.
Great. Yeah, so I think I'm going to put a bit of a general request out beyond like, where the app is and check it out, but let's start with that. Yes, for farmers that are listening that are interested in Combyne, kind of two core places, the classic website, Combyne.ag. Just remember Combyne spelled with a Y. Or if you're on the App Store, same idea, Combyne Ag, 2 words. You might see a couple other apps. Some are more clothes or fashion focused. That's a different story, but look for the app. It says crop marketing management. You won't miss it because you won't be picking up the wrong thing. More importantly, we really love feedback, and the good and the bad. Like, we take the bad in stride. It's not something we're ashamed of or we're in denial when someone says, look, this doesn't make sense, it doesn't work. That's part of the game. So especially as we start getting into things that are a little bit more complex to present or organize well, so kind of different type of grain contracts. So talked a bit about basis only, hedge to arrive, or futures first, or targets. We're really thinking hard, how do you represent this in an intuitive way in sort of the small screen that is a mobile phone? Integrations, I talked a bit about. We have farmers saying, hey, I use grain carts to track how much grain I have. Well, I like to look at the combine monitor, and a whole bunch of I have a whiteboard in my shop to track my bins. So as we think about how do we pull all this information together, we want to get these integrations right. So there's kind of 2 asks, which is, what tools would you like to see interact with Combyne if you like Combyne? And how would we do it? What's your ideas of like how do these 2 things relate to each other? So anyone who has like feedback, ideas, just hit us up at help@combyne.ag. And because we read all that stuff, and we might say, look, can we call you? We want to understand this a little bit more. We're really appreciative of that. Because the other thing we like to do is, as we kind of learn these ideas, figure out how to build them, we build prototypes. So just like you test things in any other physical thing, software is the same idea. You build a prototype of it. It's not the real thing. It looks and feels like the real thing. And then you actually ask people to play with it and tell me, is it intuitive? What's going on through your head? Are you confused? So that gives us a chance to fix it before we actually code it and actually build it into the final version. So if you're even more extreme and interested in doing that, help@combyne.ag. And then last I would say is, again, grain marketing advisors, crop insurers, people that are kind of involved in one way or the other in supporting crop marketing and risk management. And we're also trying to think really hard about how do we extend Combyne to interact between that farmer trusted advisor relationship. So that's another group. If you're interested in talking, find us, go combyne.ag/ or there's a partner page, and you'll see it's very intuitive. You can just find us there, or like anyone else, you can find me on LinkedIn, or Laura Lee on the team also helps me with partnerships. But most importantly, if you're a farmer, check out the app, play around with it, give us feedback, combyne.ag with a Y, or Google Play or Apple Store.
I love that, Alain. You can tell just from listening to you, you care about the farmer's opinion. I like to say I have a leg on both sides of the fence. I'm a farmer and I'm an industry person. And you don't know how many times I'm at an industry event with people in tech companies, big corporations, and they're implementing these things. I'm like, no. Have you even talked to a farmer about this? And you hear farmers say that, right? It's like, maybe just talk to us, ask us what we want. So I can tell you're on the right track with how farmer centric your thinking is. So great job. Anybody listening, I'll include notes and links to the website, and you can go there, find out more. You gave some details how they can contact you. So I think we covered all our bases. This has been a wonderful conversation, Alain. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time, Tracy. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. And you in the audience, thank you for tuning in again. And I look forward to seeing you on next week's episode. Thanks, guys.